She slapped him. In open court. With witnesses. Her palm cracked across his cheek like a rubber sandal in a Costco parking lot. The room went dead silent except for one slow, incredulous gasp from the bailiff. Then the presiding judge stood up from his bench, took off his robe and handed it to the man she had just slapped. "Court is now in session," he said. "And ma'am, you're about to regret everything." The man's name was Raymond Dunley, a quiet, polite 56-year-old retiree who'd moved to Maple Haven for the garden space and silence. He was a former law clerk and amateur beekeeper with a disabled adult son, Lucas, who lived with him. Lucas used a motorized wheelchair, loved courtroom dramas, and ran a popular legal commentary channel on YouTube. Enter Janice Hargreaves, HOA president, justice hobbyist, and aspiring author of HOA Handmaid's Tale. She didn't like Lucas. Claimed his wheelchair made aggressive noises, that his ramp was visually disruptive, and once tried to fine the Dunleys $500 for pigeon-adjacent wind chimes. I should know all this because Raymond Dunley is me. And this is the story of how my son became the judge in his own harassment case. It started 3 months ago when Janice decided our perfectly legal wheelchair ramp was somehow violating the aesthetic standards of Maple Haven. She sent us a formal notice printed on what I can only describe as aggressively pink letterhead claiming the aluminum ramp clashed with the earth tone palette mandated by Section 12.4 of the HOA guidelines. I responded with a polite letter citing the Americans with Disabilities Act and federal housing laws. That should have been the end of it. But Janice Hargreaves didn't become HOA president by accepting defeat. She began escalating. First it was anonymous complaints about inappropriate parking even though Lucas's van was parked in our own driveway. Then citations for unauthorized medical equipment referring to his ramp. She even complained that the beeping sound his wheelchair made when backing up constituted a noise violation during quiet hours which he had apparently decided began at 3 p.m. on weekdays. Finally, she tried to evict us from the community under a rule she invented called the Visual Tranquility Clause, which supposedly gave the HOA board the power to remove any element that disrupted the harmonious appearance of the neighborhood. I fought back with polite but firm letters quoting actual federal housing laws. Each response was more detailed than the last, complete with case citations and precedents. Lucas helped me research, turning it into content for his YouTube channel where he explained housing rights to his 70,000 subscribers. That only made Janice angrier. She called emergency HOA meetings at 6 a.m. on Saturdays, ranted on Nextdoor about weaponized disabilities, and even tried to have Lucas's YouTube channel banned for public defamation of property values. She claimed his videos showing our house were decreasing home prices throughout the neighborhood. The real estate data showed the opposite, but facts had never been Janice's strong suit. The situation reached a boiling point when she started leaving passive-aggressive notes on our door. Things like just trying to keep our neighborhood beautiful, and some people care about property values, and my personal favorite handicapped doesn't mean hand in cap demanding money from hard-working homeowners, which didn't even make sense but showed her true colors. Lucas documented everything, turning it into a series called HOA Horror Stories that was getting hundreds of thousands of views. Law students were using our case as study material. A professor from Georgetown even reached out to discuss featuring it in a textbook. Then Janice made her biggest mistake. She filed a civil suit claiming the Dunleys violated HOA guidelines and lowered neighborhood morale. She demanded $30,000 in damages for decreased property values and emotional distress. She subpoenaed Lucas to testify, insisting the court needed to see for themselves how his presence was destroying the community. Her lawyer, who looked about as comfortable as a cat in a bathtub, tried to talk her out of calling Lucas as a witness, but Janice insisted. She wanted him there in court, so she could prove that his disability was somehow a choice to inconvenience her personally. Big mistake. Huge. The case was assigned to a local circuit judge, but that judge recused himself. Turns out he was a subscriber to Lucas's channel and had already declared himself a fan of the wheelchair guy in a comments section. Per court protocol, the rotating substitute judge was next in line. Now here's where things get interesting. 6 months ago, Lucas had completed his law degree and passed the bar exam. Due to a shortage of judges in our county, he had been appointed as a part-time substitute judge for civil mediation cases. It was mostly small claims and contract disputes, nothing major. Janice had no idea. She hadn't bothered to research anything beyond her own grievances. The morning of the hearing, we arrived at the courthouse early. Lucas was there to observe the pre-trial proceedings per protocol since he hadn't been officially assigned to the case yet. The regular substitute judge was running late due to a medical emergency. Janice strutted in wearing what I can only describe as her power suit, a blindingly purple ensemble that looked like she had raided the clearance rack at a 1980s department store. She saw Lucas in the gallery and her face turned the same shade as her outfit. She marched over and called him a legal mascot, saying he was just there for sympathy points. Lucas remained calm, explaining he was there in an official capacity as a court observer. Janice laughed, a harsh sound like a crow choking on corn. She said disabled people shouldn't be allowed in courtrooms unless they were defendants or victims, that his presence was manipulative and theatrical. The bailiff stepped forward to intervene, but Janice was on a roll. She pointed at Lucas and declared that his whole Disability Act was probably fake, that he could probably walk if he wanted to, that the wheelchair was just for attention and government benefits. Then she slapped him. Right in front of the clerk, 2 lawyers, and me standing there holding a Tupperware container of lemon bars I had brought for the court staff because I'm nothing if not polite. The slap echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Everyone froze. The bailiff's hand went to his radio. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keys. And the presiding judge, who had just walked in and witnessed the whole thing, stood there in shock. He looked at Lucas, then at Janice, then back at Lucas. Without a word, he walked over, removed his robe, and handed it to my son. Please note, Lucas said evenly as he put on the robe and adjusted his glasses, that physical assault on a court officer is both a felony and deeply uncool. The bailiff immediately placed Janice under arrest. She sputtered and protested, claiming she didn't know Lucas was a court officer, that this was all a setup, that we had orchestrated this to humiliate her. The arresting officer, who looked like he had seen everything in his 20 years on the force but nothing quite like this, just shook his head and read her rights. The case collapsed instantly. Lucas, recusing himself due to personal involvement, handed the case to another judge who had been called in. That judge, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Chen, took one look at the evidence and hammered the HOA with legal penalties for discrimination, harassment, and abuse of authority. She cited 12 different federal violations, 3 state law breaches, and what she called the most egregious display of prejudice she had seen in her 15 years on the bench. The courtroom was packed by then. Word had spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Lawyers had abandoned their own cases to watch. The gallery was standing room only. Judge Chen methodically went through each of Janice's violations, from the discriminatory fines to the harassment campaign to the physical assault. She explained how Janice had not only violated the Americans with Disabilities Act but had done so with malicious intent, creating a hostile living environment for a disabled person and his family. The HOA was fined $250,000. Janice personally was fined another $100,000 and faced criminal charges for assault. But that wasn't all. The judge ordered the HOA to rewrite all its bylaws with ADA compliance specialists and undergo mandatory sensitivity training. Every board member who had supported Janice's actions was removed from their position and banned from serving on any HOA board for 5 years. The management company that had allowed this to happen lost their contract. Janice herself was banned from every HOA board in the county permanently and placed on probation for 3 years. The assault charge alone carried up to 5 years in prison, though her lawyer was already negotiating a plea deal. Janice's face went from purple to white to green as the judge read out each penalty. When Judge Chen announced the monetary fines, she actually swayed on her feet. Her lawyer had to steady her. When the permanent HOA ban was declared, she let out a sound like a deflating balloon. But the final blow came when Judge Chen stated that all legal fees for both sides would be paid by Janice personally, not the HOA, due to her criminal conduct. That was another $75,000. Janice fainted. She just crumpled to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut.